Alrighty, I'll call our special council meeting to order at 6:30. And second item in front of us is declaration of pecuniary interest in tonight's session. Does anybody have a pecuniary interest in any of these items? Seeing none at this time, if you find yourself in that position, as we move on, let us know and we'll address it appropriately. Moving on to agenda item number 3, which is in-camera items. I'll need a mover and seconder for the following motion. That in accordance with the Town of Penetanguishene Procedural Bylaw 2016-08, the Council of the Town of Penetanguishene move into an in-camera session to discuss litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. Advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Moved by Councillor Rawson, seconded by Councillor LaRue. Comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Then all in favor, and we'll adjourn in camera into the back room, please. Sorry, folks, we're running a little bit late. Honestly, we weren't in the back having a barbecue. We were actually hard at work in the back room. So we have recessed our in-camera session. We'll reconvene to that in a moment. So up next then is, we've got Stacy here, good, is into item number 5, which is delegations. And we do have a delegation regarding 38 Wolfe Street. So I guess 38 Wolfe Street. The podium is yours, and I'll ask Michelle Miotte to make sure the green light's on, and we'll get you to speak at the podium. And thank you for coming, and our apologies for holding you up a little bit. I don't know whether you, how much information you have, but if I can just pass those around to you all so that you have an idea of what we're talking about. As we go through it. It's a picture of the house, and then it's an aerial shot of the area, and the last one is the complaint that we'll be doing there. Thank you.
Your Worship?
Yes.
Just to clarify, these items that are being handed out should be, and I think I didn't get a chance to speak with Ms. Bell or Mr. Reed before, that those are the same documents that were provided to me earlier and that have been included in the agenda package?
Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Ian Reed, and this is my wife, Carolyn Bell, and we are here to respond to the complaint and subsequent proposed action by the town of Penetang against our property at 38 Wolfe Street. And the picture I've given you, there are 2 houses on the south side of Wolfe Street between Peel and Fox. North Trail is shown. This is our little house at 38 Wolfe, the white one with the picket fence around it, and then to the left is North Trail, a drainage ditch, and then another house, and those are the only 2 houses on the south side in this area. The lot is 40 feet wide, and from the aerial survey you can see it's a very narrow lot. It's 40 feet. The property line to the west goes right down the middle of the driveway and through the side of the house, and to the east on the North Trail side it goes into North Trail a little bit. North Trail is on the side of 38 Wolfe property. It is a short access road that dead ends at the log house. From the aerial photograph, you can see the log house of Chris and Lily. It is an access road for 2 people and their friends. It is not a through road, and it is essentially a private driveway owned by the town. There's very little traffic even between Peel and Fox. And the complaint to us doesn't quite make sense, as there are no restrictions on the east-west travel portion of Wolfe Street. There is a stop sign on North Trail entering Wolfe. If you were able to look at the pictures that in my book that I gave you, we find there's no restrictions to visibility either on Wolfe or North Trail. North Trail is not a through road, like I said, and is only used by 2 people and their guests. There have been no complaints from the people who live in the log house, which I thought initially might be a problem, but they have no problem with the landscaping on our property, because they do have visibility when they come to stop at Wolfe Street. There's no complaints from the residents to the east of us on the other side of the drainage ditch, and there's no complaints on the other side of the road on the north side of Wolfe Street. So we don't know who complained, and it doesn't really matter because we have an issue to deal with. We thought the Freedom of Information Act would give us some insight into this complaint, because we didn't know what the complaint was when we got a letter and a phone call from the bylaw lady, Jillian Forbes. So we wanted to see what the complaint was so we could deal with it. So we approached Andrea and Jillian, and even though we have a Freedom of Information Act, we couldn't get any information. So they didn't refer us to Stacy.
someone in the planning office, a gentleman, I don't know who it was, told us to go and see Stacy Cooper. And fortunately, Stacy Cooper was able to paraphrase the complaint for us. And the third copy I gave you is the complaint. And I don't know, I'll just read it briefly. I don't know if you've had a look at it. The owner has put up fence, shrubs, flowers on town boulevard property, blocking the view of Norse Trail, thereby making it very dangerous when people are coming out of Norse Trail. You can't see them until the last minute. There, as I said, there are no restrictions to cars. I think I crossed that out. I'm trying to just cut this a little shorter here. We'll get to an area here that I've written down. Penetang is made up of old houses because it's an old town. And when these old houses were built, 100 years or so ago, I'm sure there were very little bylaws and restrictions and road allowances. So what's happened now is with our advancing bylaws and road right-of-ways, we're ending up with lot lines that are very close to these old houses, and this is one of the cases here that it is. So Carrie gets great satisfaction out of her landscaping and making her properties look nice. So she's landscaped, unfortunately, on town property without permission. But we drove around town and had a look around, and I know this. There are some very nice properties in town, landscaped on town property. And I gave some pictures to you. Mo Lefebvre at 64 Robert, he's right on town property. 82 Robert has a retaining wall. 84, the former Dion residence, has vegetation right to the road. 18 Mariah, beside the tennis court, has a retaining wall and a garden right to the sidewalk. Unfortunately, Rob Robitaille at 63 Robert has no front yard at all. His house is right beside the sidewalk. And our opinion is, and it's just ours, that these people should be appreciated by the town as they invest their own time, money, ingenuity, and imagination into their residences to look nice, and it is certainly an asset to the town when you drive around the town and you see these beautiful properties, even though it's on town property. So back to Norse Trail. It's used as a private driveway, and we feel should not have the restriction of a sight triangle imposed. There is no restriction to visibility at 38 Wolfe and Norse Trail. Exiting Norse Trail onto Wolfe, the fence, if you look at the pictures, comes in my car window. You can see through the fence, and the car is easily visible stopped on Norse Trail from Wolfe Street. So you have clear views on Wolfe, and the person coming out of Norse Trail has to stop, which is the way the whole town is made up, of stop streets and through streets. Jillian Forbes at our meeting was insistent that we remove all vegetation, flowers, trees, and shrubs from the property at 38 Wolfe Street. And even the little maple tree that you see on the front lawn that is becoming a big maple tree rapidly. So knowing the town a little bit, I drove around and I took some pictures also in that book. And all the maple trees on Mariah Street between Edward and Robert are on town property. Now, they may have been planted on town property years ago to beautify the town, and I'm sure they were. And they are all those mature trees are closer to the road than our maple tree on the front lawn of 38 Wolfe. So in conclusion, we find this complaint is unrealistic and subsequent action by the town uncalled for. This isn't a high use. Norse Trail is not a high use road. It's an access road for two people that are using it as a private driveway. And there are no visibility restrictions. It's a dead end access to one residence and used as a private driveway. Motorists using Wolfe Street have the right-of-way, and there is no conflict with North Trail. Motorists using North Trail must stop before entering Wolfe Street, so there is no conflict with anybody coming from North Trail onto Wolfe Street. Visibility is not restricted by the picket fence, flowers, shrubs, and one tree on the town's property at 38 Wolfe. Recently, we did, after we talked to Jillian and Andrea, we did go back and have a look at it, and we removed all the higher shrubs that were there, and we cut all the lower branches off the maple tree. And I think if you have an opportunity to look at my book and the pictures, you'll see that there is no visibility restrictions. Under the Highway Traffic Act, I remember you used to have to stop, beam the stop sign, and then if you couldn't see, you creep up to the road. That doesn't seem to be in the Highway Traffic Act anymore. You stop, first of all, at the white line. If there's no white line, then you go next to the sidewalk and stop, and if there's no sidewalk, your last stop is the curb. So I've taken some pictures of my car at the curb on North Trail, and it is totally visible from anyone on Wolfe Street. So we are asking your permission to allow this landscaping to remain as it affects no one, in our opinion. We're not sure of what agreement you have with private landowners. I don't know whether you call it a license of occupation or whatever, but if we could, if you see fit to allow us to leave this landscaping there, and if you have some kind of a vehicle where you want, I don't even know what you call it, if you know that you will allow us to leave this there and you want us to sign something, we certainly will. And if you see fit that it is a problem, then of course we'll remove it. Is there any questions that anyone might have?
Council, any questions for Ian and Carolyn on this particular matter? Okay, seeing none, I was at the property today, so if you saw a white vehicle stalking out, it was me checking it out, by the way. So in case your neighbor's going, what the hell's that guy doing there? Councillor Levy.
Thank you very much, Mayor Marshall. I was also down. I was the red matrix, in case you thought you were being stalked by someone in I backed in so that I could see what a car would see,
Right.
and there's certainly absolutely no obstruction in any way, shape, or form. I'm wondering if this situation might be different in the winter with snow piled.
It's the same as any other private driveway in Penetang. You know, the snow gets piled in the driveway. They all become mounds, and then everybody has a problem with visibility. But we live in Penetang, and we deal with it, and hopefully there's not too many accidents caused by it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for driving by.
Councillor Leroux.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also drove by today, and to be quite honest, I do not see what we would call a 20-degree or 20 triangle, which is there's no way that is impeding vision going out onto that Brock Street. None.
Okay, thank you. And if I might just mention that, if you did apply the site triangle is 20 by 20, and then you join and from the property line, your bylaw says street lines. I've tried, Andrea did supply me with a bylaw that said street lines are property lines. Street lines in other municipalities are not property lines. York uses a street line being the center of the road. Oshawa uses the curb for their measurement of street lines. Penetang, as per Andrea, uses lot lines. If you took the site triangle from the lot line, from the North Trail side, it touches the side of our house. If you go along Wolfe Street, it bisects our property in half because it's 20 feet and our property is only 40 feet. So it cuts off a big chunk of the corner.
Thank you. I think Councillor Rawson had a question.
Yeah, it's more for the CEO. I'm just wondering what would be the next step to help this matter out.
Yep. So Jeff, in terms of council, so obviously council's looking for some options here. What's staff's suggested next steps given the presentation?
I'm going to defer to our Director of Planning and Community Development, if you don't mind, Your Worship, and she can provide from a staff perspective and then the options that council could entertain.
Andrea, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you to Ian and Carolyn for coming tonight. I know we have had discussions about the landscaping that's been done on the town's property itself. The way there's a couple things and errors in some of the definitions and stuff that you mentioned. So this is on town property, and the street triangle is applicable to private property itself. So the site triangle itself is not something that we would apply in this situation because it's only applicable on private property. Irregardless of that, the complaint was received and did identify safety as being an issue. And I know our bylaw officer as well as the roads department attended the scene, and in their opinion too, it may pose a liability in the future. So they recommended that the landscaping be removed from the property and move back onto private property and not be on the town road allowance. So that's where we've been. This is something that's also started last fall itself, so it's not as emergency matter, but we are addressing the complaint that the town received. In terms of process, what I would recommend is we can seek to go down the encroachment agreement route for the works that have been placed on town property. That's typically how we would manage something like this. We need to talk to Carolyn and Ian just to outline that process and what their obligations would be. Typically, we've seen a couple of these in front of council. It's an agreement. It can get registered on title. There is some legal fees that they would be responsible for, just making sure the agreement is all neat and tidy, and it gets registered itself. And it would outline the responsibilities and what the encroachments are, what happens in the future, and have that trigger for liability, and so additional insurance. So that's mainly what the town's concern is through that agreement, is making sure the town is covered should something occur on the property. So what I would suggest is if you would like staff to come back with a report on that encroachment agreement, we can work with Ian and Carolyn and craft something together for committee and council's consideration in the future.
Thank you for that. So that's one option. So what other options does council have that perhaps you would not be happy with us doing?
So I'm not sure I'm not going to be happy with whatever council decides, but the options are, is what staff would recommend, is that the items be removed back to private property in compliance with the zoning bylaw, which is where that site triangle would apply. I don't think that we are in a do-nothing type of position where, we don't allow them to keep, or we allow them to keep it but don't formalize it through some sort of agreement. So I think there's the two options, an agreement or request to remove the items.
And so in terms, I'm looking at Stacy here for procedurally, right? So oftentimes we get caught in bureaucratic red tape, and that's what I'm hearing. The path we're going down here is going to cost some money, and we're going to go into some lengthy conversations that's going to probably get a little convoluted for our residents here. So can council lift the site triangle restrictions for that? Can we exempt that property from that? Can we exempt the use of the front of that property? So what are what's council's options here?
I believe the Director of Planning, she didn't get into the details. We did have a meeting about the specifics of that. I think our CIO has said it before, that council creates policy and therefore council can do what they wish in terms of waiving it. I think what you're hearing from the Director of Planning and Development is what the staff recommendation is, but I'd ask her for clarification in terms of what specific policies and bylaws we would be in conflict of if that did happen.
Yeah, so that's really my question, is which policies would council have to deem direction to waive to make this go away? So I'd like to see that in a report. You don't have to answer it right now, but I want to see in a report what policies are in place so the council has an option to waive those policies should we should that be the will of council. And Councillor Lauder, did you have your hand up? Or sorry, Mike.
No, thank you, Your Worship. No, I was thinking along the lines that I've seen properties in Penetanguishene, as you rightly mentioned, that have been beautified, and it is on town property. And the conversation with council in the past has been, if our residents want to improve town property, we're very happy as long as it's not causing a problem. Mm-hmm. So far, I will come by and see exactly, but okay. I do not sense a problem.
Thank you.
So I'm happy with that suggestion that we come up with some secondary means.
Yeah, no, I'm like Councillor Levy. I drove in, I backed in, I drove all around it. It's a driveway.
Just through your worship, so I think if I'm hearing correctly, council would like a staff report. Staff will lay out all the options that are available, as we always do, and we'll identify which ones are in accordance with policy and not in accordance, and then council can make a decision.
Yep.
Irregardless of whether or not staff recommends an option, as I've said before, council sets the policy, so council can certainly waive the policy. It's our job as staff to simply enforce the policy, and that's where we are today.
And can we actually make sure so that we can stand down on all the bylaw activity while we go through this? So right now, we've got Jillian engaged, so, we need to throw the car in neutral while this comes back to us.
Yeah, through your worship, certainly there will be inactivity on this until council makes a decision.
Councillor Levy?
Thank you very much, Mayor Marshall, and I appreciate what you're trying to achieve, but I think perhaps most of us would like to achieve the same thing and just have staff go away and spend a lot of time and effort and money coming up with a report on this policy and that policy. Is there a way to shortcut this? If we do have the ability to bypass policy and state tonight that we would like to see the landscaping remain at 38 Wolfe.
CEO or clerk?
Yeah, through your worship, I mean, certainly my suggestion would be a staff report that council then would have all the information in front of them so that they could make an entirely informed decision. But if it's council's will and staff have the specific policy references this evening, or from a procedure perspective to pass a motion, then those could be referenced in the motion.
I think council, I'm looking around, so we get the staff report, as long as the car is neutral with the bylaws, so there's no pressure on Ian and Carolyn, just so that you know, though, I don't think our next meeting, when would this come up, Jeff, at the earliest? Just so we have a sense of timing.
At this point, the next meeting is around the 15th of September. Now, I may be looking, pending a few things, there may be a need for one prior to that, and that's going to come as a shock to council, and I see a few hands pushing me away. Nonetheless, the next scheduled meeting is the middle of September, but certainly from a staff perspective, we can absolutely throw the car in neutral, as your worship has mentioned, and it could be addressed at that meeting at the very latest.
So at the latest, it'll be September, possibly earlier if we have a special council meeting. So thank you so much for your time and for coming tonight, and go home and enjoy the rest of this beautiful evening.
Thank you very much all
Thanks.
for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. Moving on to agenda item number 6, which is adoptions of minutes not already confirmed. And we do have a couple of minutes. So it's moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, that the following minutes of council meetings be confirmed and adopted as circulated. Special Council, June 28, 2017. Council, June 28, 2017. Committee of the Whole Report, June 28, 2017. And reference item 8 on that. Does any member of council have any errors or omissions or comments on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote to approve them then. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to agenda item number 7, which is our consent agenda items, and there's 3 items in front of us, 7I, 7.2, and 7.3, and it's moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Saunders, that the following consent agenda items, having been given due consideration, be received for information. Does any member of council wish to pull any of these 3 matters? Seeing none, I'll call for vote then. All in favor? And those are all carried. Moving on to item number 8, presentation and considerations of report from our Committee of the Whole meeting. And the first one in front of us is moved by Councillor LaRue, seconded by Councillor Mayotte, that the recommendations contained within Committee of the Whole report related to Recreation and Community Services section be approved. Any member of council wish to pull any of these items for discussion? Councillor LaRue?
Your Worship, I'm going back to the curling club lease agreement. And I would ask if and when the time comes that we would have our Director of Recreation speak on the matter.
Yeah, when that comes, it's just here for consent, so it's been received for information when it'll formally come back to Sherry, to Council Sherry? Yes? Okay. Okay, thank you. Anyone wish to pull any of the items under RCS? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? The RCS items are approved. Moving on to planning and development, moved by Councillor Rawson, seconded by Councillor Levy, that the recommendations contained within Committee of the Whole report related to planning and development services section be approved. Anyone wish to pull any of these items for Councillor Rawson to speak to? Seeing none, all in favor? Those are approved. You stole your thunder, Deb. Moving on to agenda item number 8I, moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Saunders, that the recommendations contained within Committee of the Whole report related to Finance and Corporate Services section be approved. Anyone wish to pull any of these items? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Then all in favor? That is carried. And I don't have you signed off on this, but I'm going to look to move by Councillor Ross and seconded by Councillor LaRose that the recommendations contained within Committee of the Whole report related to Transportation and Environmental Services section be approved. Mover and seconder are fine with moving that. Thank you very much. Anyone wish to pull any of these items for discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, so moving on to agenda items under number 9, which are matters for consideration. The first one up is moved by Councillor Councillor Levy, seconded by Councillor LaRose, that the draft natural heritage study dated May 2017, prepared by the Severn Sound Environmental Association, be approved. Councillor Levy, please.
I think that this is the point where we pull the planners in. So I would ask Director Betty to introduce this.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council. This study, the Natural Heritage Update Study, has been a capital project of the Planning and Development Department since 2016. It was over 2 years and was carried forward for completion this year. You may recall that there has been a number of policy changes, both at the federal, provincial, and local levels, having to addressing natural heritage and how to protect them. And those types of, that update is also a requirement to form part of our official plan review, which is also on the agenda tonight. So just wanted to bring that one of the requirements to draft a new official plan is this updated natural heritage study. And so Michelle Hoodland's here from the Severn Sound Environmental Association. She's prepared a presentation giving some of the highlights of what the findings were of this natural heritage study, and can answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. So the podium is yours, and welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Natural heritage features, a few examples would be wetlands, forests, areas of natural and scientific interest, and fish and wildlife habitat. These features or areas have environmental, social, and economic benefits, such as providing clean air, cleaning our water, soil conservation, and recreation opportunities. Gardner Lee Limited conducted a natural heritage and natural hazard land study in 2001, and the Severn Sound Environmental Association conducted a Penetanguishene urban woodland assessment in 2008 for selected sites within the town. Since that time, provincial policy and the county's official plan have been updated, and various natural heritage guidance documents have been released. This particular study provides a baseline of information on existing conditions, identifies important natural heritage features based on the guidance in those existing natural heritage documents, our information is based on available data and interpretation of 2016 aerial photographs, which were the most recent available at the start of the project. The natural heritage features and areas were mapped, and an analysis of habitat was compared to federal how much habitat is enough guidelines. So essentially, it helps to identify what the town has in terms of natural heritage. The town as a whole generally meets or exceeds the federal forest, riparian, or stream, and wetland habitat guidelines, but some watersheds are doing better than others. I'm going to show you a few example results for the 4 shaded watershed areas. Just to give you a quick definition in case you're not aware, a watershed is basically a drainage area, so the area of land that drains into a particular stream or water body. The big dashed purple line is the municipal boundary. The smaller dashed purple line within that is the built boundary, and the red lines are the watershed boundaries, which in some cases extend into the surrounding municipalities. The first example is for woodland habitat. The guideline in the federal document, how much habitat is enough, is that there should be 30 to 50% forest cover and 10% interior forest cover within a planning unit. 30% forest cover is the minimum threshold and equates to a high-risk approach, whereas 50% or more equates to a lower-risk approach and is likely to support most potential species and healthy aquatic ecosystems. The 10% forest cover, the interior forest cover, what that means is forest that is further than 100 meters from the edge of a woodland patch. In the mapping, on the left-hand side is Penetang Harbor West watershed. All 3 shades of green are woodland, with the medium and darker shades of green being 100 meters and 200 meters respectively from the edge of the woodland patch. On the right is Penetang Harbor East. There's less forest cover overall and not a lot of the green, darker interior forest habitat. So overall, the town has 50% forest cover with 15% forest interior habitat, so it meets or exceeds those federal guidelines, but there are a few watersheds that are below those guidelines. The next example is riparian or stream side habitat. The guideline from the federal government is 75% of stream length should be naturally vegetated, and streams should have at least 30 meters of natural buffer on both sides of the stream. So the riparian is just the banks, the stream banks, or the stream side vegetation. Overall, the town has almost 78% of streams with a natural vegetation buffer, and 58% of the stream length has 30 meters or more on both sides of the streams. The green shading is woodland and or wetland habitat, and it should be noted that other types of natural vegetation such as meadows are not included in this just because of the limitations of the data. The purple watercourses might be a little difficult for you to see there, but you should be able to see it on the attachments. The purple watercourses have at least 30 meters of vegetation on both sides of the stream. The yellow have less than 30 meters, but do have some, and the blue watercourses have no adjacent cover. On the left-hand side is Vinden Creek watershed. The area west of County Road 93 has no cover, and then it transitions to an area that has some cover. And on the right is a watershed which has lots of forest and wetland cover adjacent to streams, and consequently has a good rating in this regard. And the last example of our habitat analysis component of the project is wetland habitat. The federal guideline is that 10% of the wetland, 10% of major watersheds should be in wetland cover, with 6% per smaller subwatershed. Overall, the town has 13% wetland cover, so it meets those guidelines. And then the 2 watersheds that I've given examples here on the left-hand side is Penetang Harbor East, and the green shaded areas are wetlands. So if you look at the streams and the wetlands in combination, the Penetang Harbor East, of course, is much of the core built-up area, and there's not a lot of wetland habitat in that, so that's where it has 4% wetland cover in that watershed. And on the right is St. Andrews Lake and Sucker Creek watershed. There's 2 very large provincially significant wetlands in this watershed, and in addition there's some unevaluated wetlands, so it contributes overall to good wetland cover in this watershed. Our study identified and mapped features and areas that have applicable natural heritage policies, either in the provincial policy statement, which came out in 2014, and or the County of Simcoe official plan. So that includes the ones listed here: significant woodlands, areas of natural and scientific interest, evaluated wetlands, coastal wetlands, and wetlands larger than 2 hectares in size, and fish habitat. And I just want to reiterate that the identification of these features was based on existing natural heritage guidelines and policies. This is the mapping that resulted from that. So that's those significant features, such as significant woodlands, areas of natural and scientific interest, those various types of wetlands, as well as fish habitat. And fish habitat, as you'll see here, includes Penetanguishene Harbor, Severn Sound proper, as well as the inland lakes and any watercourses that fish can potentially have access to. There's two different categories here, and this relates to provincial policy direction. So the no touch is the green hatching. That's where provincial policy says that there can be no development or site alteration in those features. And then the gray is what's called no negative impact. So that's where an environmental study has to be done to show that there's not going to be a negative impact on those features if development or site alteration is proposed. So just to wrap up, the study provides a series of recommendations for woodland and other habitat features. Our main recommendations are to ensure that significant natural heritage features and areas are appropriately protected through land use planning, such as the official plan and zoning refinements. And by means of local decision-making, strive to exceed the minimum ecological guidelines provided in how much habitat is enough to support healthy populations of species and maintain and enhance a robust natural heritage system which has social and economic benefits as well. Are there questions?
Okay, questions from council? Deputy Mayor, please.
Oops. Thank you, Your Worship. I was just curious about St. Andrews Lake. Has it remained the same size, or is it shrinking somewhat, or would you know that?
Through your worship, to my knowledge, it's about the same size. Wetlands sometimes do extend their boundaries or shrink their boundaries. That happens more often with coastal wetlands, which are subject to bigger water fluctuations. In the case of St. Andrews Lake, it's getting its water from the surrounding watershed, as well as a little bit of groundwater discharge, and that's remained fairly constant to our knowledge. So the boundaries are generally about the same as they were back in the 1980s when it was originally evaluated.
If I could ask one more question, what about Phragmites? Do we find that in our wetlands?
Yes, it definitely, Phragmites is found in a lot of different wetlands. We have a separate project where we have an invasive species intern, and part of what she's doing is mapping the extent of invasive species, non-native species in our area. As part of the wetland evaluations that we've done, the St. Andrews Lake wetland was evaluated back in 2002, so it's been a while. And we do note any invasive species that we find, but that's kind of a point in time. But certainly it does turn up in some places like the wetlands in the waterfront park, for example.
If I may, Your Worship, I know that there was a program that the town of Penetanguishene had been invited to participate. And unfortunately, we did not get full support of that from council. Are you still looking into the Phragmites situation here in our community?
We're tracking any reports that we get from the public in terms of on-the-ground work where we're going out to a site physically and doing some of the mapping. That would happen to a lesser degree in Penetanguishene for this year, but it is a multi-year project, so there is an opportunity to participate in future years.
Thank you.
Councillor Levy, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just wanted to call attention back to the woodland habitat, and I wanted to ask, I guess I know the answer to this, but I'd like the rest of council to know, that when you can call something a woodland or a forested area, is there any criteria for the quality of such a woodland?
There is a definition for how you identify woodland, and it's being used basically at the provincial level. So we did start with a data set that we refined, so that the trees have to be visible on an air photo, for example, so they can't be just little tiny seedlings. And they have to be a certain height, and there has to be a certain amount of them in a particular area. So if you have a regenerating field that's very sparsely got trees in it, that's not going to be identified as a forest. In terms of quality of the habitat, there's no differentiation between a monoculture plantation of one particular species and a nice diverse woodland. They're both considered woodland habitat.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? See none, thank you very much, then. And so we do have a motion on the floor in front of us that the that the draft natural heritage study dated May 2017, prepared by the Severn Sound Environmental Association, be approved. All in favor of that motion? That is carried. Moving on to agenda item number 9.2, moved by Councillor Levy, seconded by Councillor LaRose, that the draft official plan dated, that the draft official plan dated July 2017 by WSP be received for information, and that the draft official plan dated July 2017 by WSP be released for public review and consultation. I think we have our guests here to present the topic, but Andrea, if you want to introduce our guests and the topic, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. We do indeed have both Greg and Arthur here from WSP tonight to give a brief presentation on the draft new official plan. I did want to just touch on a couple of things. So this is a fairly significant milestone, in our opinions, in the progress we're making on the drafting of a new official plan for the town. This is something that has been a capital project from, again, 2016 that's carried forward in 2017. And it does, this is a culmination of a significant amount of work that both the staff, the public, and the consultants have prepared in moving us forward with the draft official plan. The purpose really tonight is to present it to council, and as well is to get direction from council to go out to the public and hear what they have to say about what's been done in this new official plan. We do anticipate and expect there to be refinements and changes made to the final document, so this is not by any means the last chance that council is going to have to review and hear from the public on it, but it does mark an important step to making sure we continue to consult and engage our residents and larger stakeholders on the future growth and development of the town of Penetanguishene. So I think Greg's going to take it off and give you the high-level presentation on what's in there.
Welcome, Greg, and thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Is everybody still with me? It's beautiful evening out there, and certainly not the certainly a little dry information tonight, but I'll try and make this quick. Official plans are very important documents in municipalities in Ontario especially, and this one is no different. This one is certainly benefiting from other background information than what otherwise might be available in some municipalities, and I know SSEA just presented one very important document, and it's very good to see that it will be released or I guess it was, yeah, it's approved. So certainly important, because without that we can't actually continue on the official plan. It's very important information, and certainly something that the county would be looking for when they would undertake their review. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is just very brief. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but I am obviously here for question. As Andrea mentioned, what's important tonight is that nothing's being approved, it's just being released to the public, because it's very important that the public have an opportunity to review this document. As I mentioned, it's not the most exciting information that might be available, and it's certainly very long, but it is important that everybody have the opportunity to review it because of its importance in the municipality. So you'll recall we had a visioning exercise, a visioning phase in this project that was right at the outset about a year ago. As I reported to you at that time, it was very successful. It was successful because we got a lot of very good input, and that input was used to inform the preparation of the background reports, but also the official plan. And if any of you have had the privilege of going through the document, it's all there. It's all in there, especially in the first section, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we're in phase 4. A lot of work has happened up to this, and we're almost there. We're very close. Once we get some consultation completed in the fall, it's our intent to return and seek adoption. And what would happen after that, it would go to the county for approval. So we're looking to have that done later this fall and technically, I guess, closer to winter. So I already copied this, so we can skip that. So in terms of the organization, there are a number of sections. They are organized this way on purpose. It's sort of, it's like a book. You want to have an introductory section which talks about how to read the plan, how to interpret the plan. I call it non-operative policy. It doesn't have any teeth, but it just gives the reader, whomever that might be, some context into how the document should be read. General policies are just that. They're meant to apply across the town. They include policies like urban design. They include policies like natural heritage. They include policies like economic development. And those policies are meant to, again, apply across the town, but not be terribly specific to one particular area. The land use framework is especially specific to one particular area wherever it applies. So, for instance, you'd have we call them neighborhood areas. It's meant to discuss, residential, really just mature areas that have existed for quite some time. It's meant to apply to whatever those lands are being designated. And I'll go through the various designations in a little bit. Infrastructure is basically roads, water, wastewater, storm, trails, whatnot. And implementing the plan is really, I call it a planning toolbox. It's meant to provide and enable various tools under the Planning Act that the municipality can use to further implement the official plan. One of them, as an example, is the zoning bylaw. And terms it's just like a glossary. It's meant to provide any additional context to allow for consistent interpretation in the case where somebody might not understand one of the terms used in the official plan. So that section has been there just for convenience. And then we have station network trails. So some of the general policies I touched on. I've only highlighted ones that I think you might be interested in, think is in quotations based on my interpretation. So the community design and built form, urban design policy, it's very important to have in your official plan, because without that, it leaves more room for interpretation. It certainly, by having them, allows for a more consistent application of urban design across the town. So one of the things that the urban design policies talk about is compatibility and how that should be applied across the town. Certainly something that is important when having a new development adjacent to, say, an existing development to ensure that impacts are mitigated. A couple of the items from community facilities and parks and open space is really, you have a parks classification in your current official plan. This sort of takes it to the next level, makes it, sort of updates it, makes it a bit more contemporary, but also identifies, and I've never done this before, but with help from Andrea, we identified, who is to design and construct the parks. I know through various development application and depending on the size of what's being proposed, it's often up in the air, and you want to ensure that it's a consistent across the board, because you don't want to, say, make somebody construct a park in one case, but then not required in another case. So that has been identified in the official plan. Something else that's been identified is urban forestry policies. Again, it doesn't sound like anything important, but it certainly is, because it gives the position of the town and what's important. Policies have been introduced that relate to public trees, private trees on existing lots, as well as public trees, and then private trees for new development. So that is in there to provide guidance on how to apply those policies. Cultural heritage has been updated. It has been a while since, obviously, your official plan was prepared, so the cultural heritage policies have been updated. They are more robust. What has been included is policies related to marine heritage. So Penetanguishene has a rich cultural history, and historically, cultural heritage really only related to land. Marine heritage is lands underwater, but fairly close to the shore. And so where there would be any development proposed close to that, there would be additional requirements on the proponent to, say, investigate to make sure there are no impacts on any of the marine heritage resources that may be there. Housing, I'm not going to talk about all of it. Secondary dwelling units, I'm sure, are not a surprise to all of you. It's certainly another way to allow for more affordable housing types. Our recommendation was that they be permitted throughout the town, and through discussions, we recognize that a lot of the issues that people have with some of the secondary dwelling units relate to parking. And you certainly don't want to create an issue where you have too many cars parked on the street, or you essentially want to ensure that you have enough parking for everybody. And so what we've sort of pulled back on, which, you know, we'll wait to see what the county says. So secondary dwelling units would be permitted everywhere except townhouse dwellings as of right. And then the townhouse dwellings may be permitted subject to the fact that they might be able to accommodate parking. One item that I would draw your attention to is laneway housing. Through various discussions with the steering committee and through some research that we did, we're proposing policies related to accommodating houses on laneways. And to my knowledge, there aren't many municipalities in Ontario that have done that. And this is one of the first that I've done, where a policy structure was put in place in an official plan that talks about laneway housing and where and how that would be permitted. Where and how it would be permitted in the town would be public laneways. And the reason why many municipalities don't permit laneway housing is because they're often on private laneways. And that poses a problem with respect to legal access. It proposes problems with respect to emergency access, because often they're not maintained in the winter. I know the laneway that my garage is on is not maintained at all, which would be a problem if that was my primary access. So it does only apply to public laneways, but in the town there are public laneways that could accommodate this. I can get into that if anybody has any questions, but it's not something that would be permitted as of right. It would have to go through, we're not at the zoning bylaw stage, but when the town undertakes a zoning bylaw, it would be decided at that point if it would be permitted as of right, but I would assume it would be subject to site plan control. Intensification, we don't necessarily need to dwell on this because it's nothing that the town can do to change it. It talks about achieving intensification targets and density targets which are imposed by the county. Majority of the intensification will be directed to the downtown and waterfront area, major roads, and mixed use and commercial land use designations. What really this says is that you're not going to intensify employment areas like to meet this target necessarily, and you're not going to intensify existing neighborhoods. There may be infill opportunities, but it's not going to be direct, like a target for intensification. Municipal corporate sustainability. This is something we typically put in official plans. It really just gives the town a position on what this means. So for instance, sustainable neighborhood development standards. It encourages, it doesn't require. So I think that would be the difference between having significant teeth and just, you know, being a good thing that you can encourage people to do. So for instance, low impact development, that's the kind of thing that would be in sustainable neighborhood development standards, or allowing people to perhaps, provided Public Works is okay with it, try to achieve more, we'll call it lot efficiency, so take care of their own building standards are very similar to that. I won't get into the natural heritage features and areas because that was already discussed with you, or at least try to achieve less impact on the town system. Just an example. Green site and building standards are very similar to that. I won't get into the natural heritage features and areas because that was already discussed with you. Really, the difference between your existing official plan and where this is right now are a couple of things. One, you still have, I forget if the current OP has 2 EPs. It does, yeah. So this still has 2 EPs, environmental protection designations. The difference is that the EP2, so EP1 is the no-touch, as Michelle had mentioned previously. The EP2, the EP1 is no-touch. EP2 is the land use designation that will require additional study to ensure that there's no impact on whatever is there. These lands are significantly larger than what you currently have, but as Michelle stated, and incorrectly so, a lot of legislation has changed since your current official plan was prepared, and as I've mentioned before, this is just the way it happens. When your current official plan was prepared, you didn't have the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, which I would suggest is Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry's Bible on how to conserve, protect, and enhance natural features and areas. So the fact that you've adopted that document tonight, I commend you for doing that because it's a very important document and one that is informing the development of the official plan. some of the other items that are in the natural heritage features and areas section relate to environmental impact statement requirements, so EIS. So when everybody says you have to do a study, all those details are in there. So it allows for a more consistent application of those requirements and how one would do an environmental impact statement. Mineral aggregate resources. It identifies where pits and quarries are. It identifies that those resources are very important for the long term. It's really implementing provincial policy. We are not proposing to designate those moving forward, only because they have certain permissions under the Aggregate Resources Act, which trumps the Planning Act. So the permissions are certainly there, the direction is certainly there, but we're not proposing to designate them. Risks to public health and safety really are natural hazards, human-made hazards, and other environmental hazards like severe slopes and whatnot. That's not going to change anything significant from what you currently have in your official plan. It's something that has to be there because it is a provincial interest, and we have updated that based on our experience elsewhere in Ontario. Water resources and source water protection are essentially implementing the source water protection plan that was prepared by MHBC. We essentially was a cutting and pasting exercise, and anything that was relevant in that study, in that plan, we've implemented in the official plan. And I'll show you that particular schedule in a minute. So land use framework, it won't be a significant departure from what you currently have, except for two things. And I will draw your attention to those on both screens. I know you're all looking at that one, so for your benefit, I will look over here. So there are two big changes. One being the amount, whoops, wrong one. The amount of, we'll just call it green. And this is, so the environmental protection one is the no touch. So that's the really what's, for the most part in your current official plan, which has been updated based on the natural heritage study. The EP2 is the, sorry, I'm having trouble differentiating the colors. But yeah, thank you. The EP2 is really the lands that would require additional study. They are significantly larger, but for the most part, they are in the rural area. There are certain lands within the built-up area, but I don't think they're significantly different. Well, maybe they are a little bit different than what you currently have. But anyways, for the most part, they would require additional study to allow for any development. The other item I wanted to draw to your attention is we'll just say the designation of employment lands. So we originally in our land use analysis identified, you may recall from the last presentation, we had to identify available supply to accommodate development for the next 20 years. And within that report and within the analysis, we identified that the town has enough land and you don't need any additional lands. Furthermore, you actually had in excess of what you needed, but I don't think it would make sense to de-designate lands. Skip to the preparation of the natural heritage study. And the natural heritage study identified, as was discussed, lands that should be conserved because they had a natural heritage feature or area on them. And what was identified in this area is that a significant portion of your employment lands designated for future growth have a natural heritage feature on them, a significant woodland. So that's a problem. We had numerous discussions, I think is fair to say, and it was our recommendation that it doesn't make sense to identify these lands as supply, because you can't have lands identified for supply that are constrained because they have significant woodland on them. It doesn't make sense. There's no way of determining what amount of land is left after you do an environmental impact statement. So our recommendation is that those lands, the lands that are lost from having the significant woodland on them, be reallocated somewhere else. And that would allow the town to continue, being able to plan for the future. So in discussions with staff, these lands here were identified. And we have had, it was also our recommendation that we should discuss this with the county. We didn't think it would make sense to come to you with a recommendation that would just get swatted out of the sky by the county. I won't say that the county will absolutely support this, but they are aware, and it's something that they will consider. But based on our discussions, they were somewhat receptive to it, but they do need to consider it a bit further. But for the most part, aside from the natural heritage features on this schedule and the employment, none of it has changed significantly. It does look a little nicer than your existing one, I will give it that. The policy overlay schedule, which is Schedule B, the intent of this is to not designate these lands, but identify what may be there. So, for instance, you have your wellhead protection areas, and you also have site-specific areas, areas that you may recall that we identified as future study areas, or areas that, again, don't need to be designated as anything right now, but should be studied further to determine how they might develop over time through secondary planning. And then you've got site-specific areas, which are essentially the marinas. Again, we didn't feel that a special designation should apply to those, but the site-specific policy area would recognize what's there and allow them to continue doing what they need to do. In the road schedule, I know Brian likes this one. You've got major and local roads. You've got something that we introduced, something for heritage roads. It's just policies that recognize their importance in the history of the town. There might be any particular viewscapes or scenic amenities that might be there. So they have been discussed in the plan. We also talk about encouraging complete streets and road diets. So again, complete streets are really just trying to accommodate everything on a street. So for instance, complete streets would have a proper public realm or a sidewalk, potentially bike lanes, various types of land uses, things of that sort. And road diets are really taking an existing road and seeing how it might get, removing parking to accommodate a bike lane, or narrowing a right-of-way to allow for, or narrowing a road to allow for wider sidewalks, as an example. Nothing requiring council or the town to do that. It's just something that enables you to do that. And again, this schedule also identifies cycling trails and active transportation throughout the town. So the infrastructure section of the plan, as I mentioned, talks about transit, talks about water and wastewater, and talks about stormwater. I won't get into this. None of this is necessarily exciting. None of it is necessarily that different than what you may have seen in the past. It's just something that through the various studies we prepared, it's just taking it to the next level and applying that policy from the background documents. I guess one of the things that's different than your existing official plan is ensuring that existing infrastructure is optimized before going into a new area. Another way of saying it is there's no leapfrogging. So you don't have a cluster of development and then go and service 5 kilometers down the road to allow for a couple of houses. It's not something that the plan would support, and it's something that certainly provincial policy doesn't support. So the plan does speak to that. Implementation, as I mentioned, is really the planning toolbox. It talks about the planning period, talks about, and the planning period in this case, we often in land use planning talk about a 20-year planning horizon. In this case, it's merely to 2031 because the county's official plan goes to 2031, and lower tier municipalities like the town has to conform to that. Monitoring, reviewing, and amendments, planning and administration. As I mentioned, it enables various tools under the Planning Act, so secondary plans, zoning, minor variances, and so on. It talks about public consultation and participation in the planning process, what that is, when the public is to be consulted, and how. It talks about cross-jurisdictional coordination, so really working with Midland and the county for various, depending on the project, you should be discussing those with various neighboring communities or the county, and then financial management, that you're not going to, again, do anything that would be in detriment to financial planning in the town. So for instance, you wouldn't extend a road or infrastructure to an area that otherwise shouldn't be serviced. And that is essentially my presentation. As I mentioned, the intent tonight is really to have this document received and then released to the public for consideration. As you're aware, the NHS was adopted tonight, so I don't need to talk about that. Once this is released to the public, it will be circulated to the county for review, for pre-consultation. It's very important to do that early, because if you wait to the end, it will take longer for your approval. We're looking at a public open house in the fall, once we hear back from the county, with council approval, council adoption fall, as well as ideally the approval from the county in late this year. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Sure, Greg, I've got a couple, then I'll look to the others. So I was a little confused when we talk about laneway housing. So why would we set up an environment that says we're pro-laneway housing, but you're going to have to come back and apply for it? Why wouldn't we set the table so that the laneway housing's allowed, all set there? If I want to build a laneway house, once this is approved, the house goes in. We just did this for the medical marijuana plant up in our industrial zone. We have no application for that, but we said it's now zoned for that. There's no, somebody comes into our town and wants to open up a medical marijuana facility, they know where they can do it, and all the red tape's gone. So why would I create a red tape scenario on laneway housing?
So we haven't created a red tape scenario. You just haven't done the zoning bylaw yet. Once the zoning bylaw is done, then depending on what that says, there might be no red tape.
So we can't do the zoning bylaw at the same time as the official plan? The
No.
plan comes first, zoning comes second?
Correct, yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the other one you mentioned was you talked about parking, and I always scratch my head on, why do I care about parking on a private piece of property? So if I'm an investor on my own and I decide to build a fourplex, and I'm going to build that fourplex on the full footprint of my property with no driveways, because I think I can rent it out, why would the town care if I have a driveway there or not? Why do I want to get into a private business discussion on parking? I'm taking the risk, the town's not.
So I can't speak to your existing bylaw, but typically, official plans don't deal with parking. It's the zoning bylaw. So typically, zoning bylaws would suggest that there are minimum parking requirements. So if you had a fourplex, per unit, you'd be required to have, I'm guessing, one parking space, which would be required off-site. Now, there are circumstances depending on what town you're in, what city you're in, what area you are in within either of those examples, where you might not require parking. So you might be within the downtown, and you might have free parking lot right next door. So in that case, you might consider not having a parking requirement for that particular example. But the official plan, I only use this as an example. The official plan is not going to say yes or no towards what's going to happen. That's your zoning bylaw.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Councilor, any other questions for Greg? Councilor Rawson, please.
Thank you. Just two quick ones. I know during the council powwow session we had, I think Councilor Saunders brought up two good points that I held on to that I appreciated. One was about keeping people here. He spoke quite a bit about, we want to attract people, we want to keep people here, and I want to resonate what that looked like here. The other piece in the infrastructure piece you spoke of tonight, you spoke of water and sewer, and I get it's town-delivered service. A little while ago, we invested, I think, $15,000 with a SWIFT program to bring high-speed internet here, and I don't see anything. I know we don't deliver it, but I don't see anything here about technology. We talked about technology and home-based business and the like, and I don't see that resonating through this document. So I just wanted to not lose sight of that, and if you can comment that. And my final one is about how are we going to do the public consultation? I want to hear some out-of-the-box thing, and we get more than 9 people show up. So I'd really like to hear some thought on that.
Okay, so just through your worship, Councillor Rawson, the first question was related to technology, or the first question was related to keeping people here? Here. So just to be blunt, official plan won't keep people here. The best thing that we can do in the preparation of an official plan is, depending on what people are looking for, allow for flexibility. And by allowing for flexibility in your employment areas, allowing for flexibility on various private properties, for people to do what they need to do without having to go through, as your worship said, red tape. That was the intent of our exercise. So again, understanding that, if I can go back to the, understanding that, where lands are constrained, you don't want to have those as designated supply. So one of the recommendations, as I mentioned, was to look at additional lands to ensure that the town is positioned appropriately for the future. But I guess I would argue is allowing for both private and public flexibility is sort of a theme that I would say is in the official plan. But in terms of keeping people here, it's something that a land use planning document is very difficult to do, based on my experience anyways. In terms of technology, I didn't touch on the section because it's the first time I've ever been asked that question. There is a specific section in the plan that talks about utilities and telecommunications, which they're permitted everywhere. There's an economic development section in the official plan that talks about innovation. But in terms of high speed, it doesn't say anything like that, but it's certainly something we could take away and certainly bolster in the plan if that's what council would like. The next question was, the consultation, yes. So this isn't the first time council has asked about public consultation. This isn't the first time that I would say that land use planning is not the most exciting thing that people want to spend their evening doing. So what we did as part of the past consultation attempts was Twitter, social media, which we haven't done in many projects. The reason being is that official plans have a long lifespan, and in order to have a successful social media program within an official plan project, it needs to be updated constantly. I think, based on the experience that we had, we did get a lot more input, we'll say electronically, than we had in person, which I would suggest is just as important as having people there. We have had, we call it a pop-up booth. I was at your day one of the farmers market last year, which I thought was very successful. We did get some good input for the visioning, but when it comes to the development of policy, it's very difficult for people to get their head around because not a lot of people understand the implications of that. And as I've mentioned to you before, without saying something that might be inflammatory, people are very, they're not terribly interested in land use planning. But some of the options include, as I mentioned before, beefing up the social media platforms, the usual flyers and things on TV and the radio. But I would say the most important thing that I would recommend is that every member of council pick 5 people to talk to and go out and speak to them about why this is important, why they should come to these meetings. Because without that, people don't generally get terribly interested. And I haven't seen, in various municipalities that I've worked in, many councillors don't do that. And this is the first time that I've actually recommended that council go do that, because you've asked, and my suggestion is that council go out and speak to the public. And I'm certainly, there's nothing that's written in stone that would suggest that, what I've just said has to happen. If there's any other ideas, we're happy to accommodate those.
I think it's good pushback, and council can maybe try and do some recruiting for that for sure. But I think Councillor Rawson's point was thinking outside of the box, and maybe have the meeting on the George and Queen down there, or Serendipity Cruise. So get creative, think outside the box, and see if we can excite people to some other things.
Absolutely.
Been in many condo sales where you have to go through 45 minutes before I get to swim in the pool. So, that type of philosophy. But Councillor Rawson pulled a conversation thread that I liked as well. So in terms of the fiber technology, so in their official plan, we talk about water and wastewater and what that looks like. Mm-hmm. But I agree that we should be looking at fiber, so you shouldn't be building any new subdivision in the town of Penetanguishene that a fiber doesn't come through that subdivision out to the main intersection nearest to that subdivision. That again, now is that zoning, is that official plan, or where does that come up?
An official plan can guide that, okay. And I certainly think it's something that we will consider. Okay. And I think it's honestly something as simple as in a few places in the plan where we say water and wastewater should be optimized. Well, so should, we'll just call it utilities or for lack of a better term, fiber networks.
I think we really need to call it what it is, which is fiber. Don't confuse it with utility, i.e. cable TV and
Fair
Bell. It's fiber.
We can certainly do that. I think it would only help the plan. So that's a very good point.
I think Councillor Levy had some questions, comments?
I just wanted to make a comment and thank you very much, Greg. Delightful working with you. Councillor Lauder and I have been part of the steering committee and have thoroughly enjoyed the process. Although I must say, I wanted to comment further on the Environmental Protection 2 land, the lighter, prettier shade of green. Greg mentioned that it's not a significant change from the last time, and I would like to suggest it's hugely significant and will have very important impact on people who own land for future development in our area that now will not be able to use their land. We will not be able to get the growth, the density targets that the province has set out for us. Midland's in the same situation where we are bound to increase our density, but upper tier provincial policy tells us, but no, you can't do it here and you can't do it here. You can maybe do it here, but you have to pay another couple $100,000 hiring expensive planners to convince us that you can do it there. So this is very important and has it will have a great deal of impact on how we build, where we build, how we achieve any of our density needs under places to grow. And I think we have to work closely with Midland, with the county, and with the province to find a way around this conundrum of we've got to grow, we've got to build, but no, you can't do it here, here, and here. So this is good. This is going to cause us a great deal of grief in the future. And Councillor Rawson, I think once the people that own all this land find out what they're up against facing, they will be at the meeting, and they will want to let us know their feelings. So had to do that, Greg. I'm sure you want to respond, but we are bound by provincial and county rules to have this natural heritage study. The consultants who did it did a very good job, and I'm certainly not criticizing their work whatsoever. I'm criticizing the process that has seen us in a situation where, because of a variety of situations outside of our control, trees have been permitted to grow, and now they have to stay. I'm not anti-tree, goodness knows, but we have a problem. We can't meet the needs and meet the growth and keep every tree. So I'd like you guys to all have a really good long look at this and see what you think it might, how it might impact our future.
Greg.
Through your worship, Councillor Levy, you're right, I misspoke when I said that. What I meant to say is that the lands designated for future development for residential purposes haven't changed significantly, because those lands are actually not constrained to the extent that, say, the employment lands are that are here. I would also mention that there's nothing in the plan that would certainly encourage development in the rural area, which is really the more significantly impacted of the lands in the town. So for the most part, the lands that are identified for future growth for, say, residential purposes are not terribly constrained. So yes, there are lands in the rural area that will be highly constrained. It doesn't mean nothing can happen. It just means that they might need to undertake a study, a scope study, that would require evaluation of what's there to determine whatever they're doing is appropriate.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Greg, we'll final question. Councillor Rawson, sir?
Well, I like what Councillor Levy just said, but are we handcuffed? Like, do we have any options? Like, it seems to me like we're just sitting here and talking, but we have nothing to say. Like, we have no power here, so what's the point?
I'll go to Greg first, and then I'll let Councillor Levy do.
Through your worship, Councillor Rawson, I think what I would say to that is it is a top-down approach. Certainly the province identifies what's important to conserve, protect, and enhance. It's further identified at, say, the upper tier, so the county level at this point would then go through and identify what's important for the same reasons. But it comes down to the lower tier, so the town, to undertake these studies, like the natural heritage study, to identify what's important. And where those studies identify lands such as the ones that are identified on the schedule, if they are important, then you're right, there isn't a lot that you can do at this level. It would require a different discussion at, say, the county and provincial level, which certainly something you can do, but you have to come prepared for that.
Councillor Levy?
I just wanted to mention that the first thing to do is for everyone to have a good look at the dark green and the light green and think about the town and drive around and say, well, they wouldn't be able to build here and they wouldn't be able to build there. I'm not as worried about the rural unserviced land. I'm worried about more concerned with the land off of Thompson Road and in our existing industrial area, where we want it to expand our industrial area. So, yeah, I just ask that we familiarize ourselves with this particular map. And of course, we approved the study tonight. And yes, our hands are tied. We had to. But I think going forward, we have to know what we're up against with county and the province if we think this is going to put an unfair burden on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea, question, comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to supplement to Greg's comment in response to Councillor Rawson. Greg went through a very good overview of the policy side of things. One point to touch on is with regards to our land needs. And so our hands tied. Have we proposed to designate lands that are going to take away from our supply? Is kind of, I think, what I heard from your question. And I think overall, the land needs review identified that we have sufficient land to accommodate growth, well beyond enough land designated for both residential and to a smaller extent, employment lands itself. So we know we can still grow in our town. What we do see with this introduction of a larger natural heritage area is the fact that there may be additional steps required before development can occur. I'm not saying that this is an easy process itself. It really and truly is a balancing act. That the decision the council has to make is what do you do to balance both natural heritage and development, and it's a pressure that every municipality is feeling, but it is what it is, and your role as decision makers in this is really to weigh those balances. Natural heritage is very difficult to bring back. Once it's gone, it's gone. So in this case, I think your stewardship of the natural heritage lands where we can is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Andrea. Well, Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question concerning the process. Once we've gone to the community and asked for input on this report, does it come back to council for further debate, discussion, decision, et cetera?
So through your worship, Councillor Saunders, with respect to your question, the idea is that once this goes out to the public, we will receive comment, and then depending on what the comments are, the plan may be updated, and then we will come back again to council for a similar presentation, but more specifically what has changed, what all the comments were, and then at that time you'll have an option to study anything further or proceed with adopting it.
So, for example, to be specific, I was interested in your comment about you'd like to encourage residential home building on laneways. There are other communities who have gone in a totally different direction, and they're discouraging building on laneways. And before we jump into an approval of this, I think it's important that we perhaps hear the rationale behind that. I mean, when I think about Nettleton Lane down there, if we're going to encourage building along Nettleton Lane, then we have to think about the provision of emergency services and that kind of thing, and getting a fire truck down Nettleton Lane is a bit of a chore. So it's those kind of shadings of the issue that I think it would be appropriate for us to have a future discussion about.
Through your worship, which I believe is reasonable. All the plan does is provide sort of a window to allow for the discussion to happen. It certainly doesn't provide a green light. As I mentioned to your worship, the intent is that this would be identified in the zoning bylaw, and if there was, which, as you're well aware, there still are other requirements outside of the Planning Act, which would include provision of emergency services, infrastructure, and so on. So it's not simply a land use planning exercise. There are a lot of other things that have to happen. This is just one option to get it going. But I agree completely. It's not just a green light for that.
Okay. Final comments or questions? Councillor Lauder.
Thank you, Worship. Just to reiterate what Greg has said there, I'm really excited about, and I got to tell you, I haven't read every page so far. There's a lot of reading there, but what I have read, I'm very excited because it is opening the door. The plan is painting a great picture of the city. The natural heritage, once again, is shown in great detail how much wealth we have. And I will admit that we, part of the steering committee, did come to the natural heritage and ask if we could cut it back a little bit, and their response was, that's not our job. Our job is to just report on what we have here in the city. That's where Greg and Andrea has come back and said it's going to be a challenge for us to ensure there is enough land for us to continue and build. It's going to be a challenge for us to make it right. But the big thing is that reading this official plan as the draft that's being presented right now is really opening up a beautiful picture of Penetang. And coming back to your worship, your original, you and Councillor Rawson, how do we invite people, get people here? Well, that's what this plan is going to do, because it really shows the richness, the vast culture that we have, both naturally and culturally. So those are the things that are important. And it is going to be council's job now to really dig deep and say, what areas can we, as Andrea just mentioned, if we need some of the natural heritage to be used, we have to justify it to ourselves, to our people, and make those changes, those zoning bylaws to accommodate. So from a planning standpoint, we'll set the open door, the flexibility. Now the next step is our zoning bylaw, and that's where we get into the nitty-gritty of what exactly can go where. But once again, we try to make that as flexible as possible so that we're not cutting the doors, cutting the strings. We're allowing people to come in and with their, their futuristic thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Greg, thank you. Have a great evening. So we do have a motion in front of us, Council, moved by Councillor Levy, second by Councillor LaRose, that the draft plan date July 2017 by WSP be received for information, and that the draft plan dated July 2017 by WSP be released for public review and consultation. All in favor of that motion? That is carried and approved. And Council, it's about 6 minutes to 9, so let's take a break till 9 o'clock, please. Thank you. All righty, I'll call us back to order. And the next item in front of us is 9.3. Okay, I'm going to need a mover and second for this. Some reason it wasn't signed, but I can get that. So I need a mover and seconder for the following recommendation. The council enter into a letter of agreement with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for the provision of green municipal funding for the Ojibwe Landing ecological and human health risk assessment, and that a bylaw for the contribution agreement be brought forward by staff for council approval. And maybe Councillor Roston LaRose would move that for me. It's under your section. Thank you very much. Comments and questions on this? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for vote. All in favor? That is approved. Okay, moving on to 9.4. It's moved by Councillor LaRue, seconded by Councillor Mayat, that the additional funds of $9,103.09 required to complete the waterline repairs in Maguire Park and Memorial Park be funded through the savings achieved in the Maguire Park parking lot resurfacing capital project. Councillor LaRue, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sure the report is quite explanatory and gives the reasons why the 9,103 overage in regards to repair or replacing Maguire Park and Memorial Park water lines happen. And one of the main reasons now is, I think at the time when Jeff was doing the costing to do the Maguire Park, he was not aware that the park was being repaved, and I understand that the water line that exists and needs repairs and might need future repairs, that it just be completely replaced off the parking lot and not have to start tearing up the parking lot in a year or two because there's another break in that line somewhere. So with that, there was an overage in the parking lot itself. The budgeted amount came under 14,000, so we're recommending that this 9,000 overage to do the repairs to these two water lines, that the funding be taken from the overage in the parking lot paving.
Thank you very much for those explanations. Council, any questions for either Councillor LaRue or our director? Councillor LaRose, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a problem with the report per se. What I do have a problem with is how, in a town our size, does one department not know that we're paving a parking lot, and the other parking lot that's getting paved doesn't understand that there's already a water break? That's pretty bad on our part. To how did people not know? So out of the three parks, we should have known that one down at Maguire. If Memorial Park, according to the report, was going to get done when we were doing Main Street because it would already be dug up, that means that it's been busted for a while. So if that's the case and we're already here in the middle of July, can that one not just wait till Main Street gets torn up next year and save us the difference, because that's what it says in here? And on the other one, it's down to the splash pad. And I'm pretty concerned that it's only been open for one full season and already we have a water line break. Was there no warranty on any of that work that was installed? Or it just seems pretty bad that one's only a year old, we break it. The other one we were going to do because we were doing the road, and now we're not doing the road, so now we're going to pay extra to get it done, and then next year we're digging up the road. And the last one, here we are paving over the problem when it's already broken, so obviously we knew it was broken, and now we're going to put it beside it. It just seems like a whole big cluster screw-up for no particular reason.
Thanks to our CEO for some of the comments, background, and the conversation. I guess you do meet with staff, you talk this, so obviously they slid through the cracks somehow, but I think reasonable expectation is in it. Yeah, so staff do meet, and obviously they slid through the cracks, but in terms of some of the options that Councillor LaRose delayed doing one year, moving the next, did you want to address that, or did you want?
I'm going to let their Director of Rec, if you don't mind, Your Worship.
Or Brian then, I think, is Brian or Sherry anyway, so I can see you're both looking at it.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor LaRose. When Jeff was preparing the estimate for the park, he was well aware of the paving in the park, and it wasn't an issue. Essentially, what we were doing is we're torpedoing a new service for this, and we're going to deaden or abandon the existing service in place, which would allow us to go ahead with the paving, so that wasn't an issue. With regards to the Memorial Park, we planned on doing this as part of our 2017 capital plan, assuming that Main Street was going ahead. The costs associated with doing this, it would be relatively the same if you were doing it with Main Street or not. So the installation methods would have been the same. Well, yeah, so we could defer it and do it as part of Main Street, certainly, but that's not obviously how it was tendered, so.
So Brian just articulated, so there's no upside to deferring it. Costs are going to be relatively the same.
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sherry, did you want to make a comment, or you're fine with Brian's? Okay, good. All right, seeing no other hands up, then I'll call for the vote on this motion. All in favor? Opposed? And that motion is carried. Moving on to 9.5, and again, I'll need a mover and seconder. This will come, I'll look for Councillor LaRose and Councillor Ross to second this under their section that the extension of the existing Philip H. Jones Pollution Control Plant upgrades contract administration and an inspection services agreement with AECOM be approved for an estimated cost of $87,350 plus HST. Section chairs comfortable with moving this? Okay, Brian, did you want to speak to this at all, or Council have any questions on this one?
Yes, I can speak to this, Your Worship. Yes, the report in front of Council tonight is to extend the contract administration and inspection services for our Philip H. Jones upgrades project. Our previous extension has lapsed in terms of the budget extension, so we've got our consultant to prepare a budgetary estimate to complete the remaining works on site, which has been appended to the report. And some of which are, actually 3/4 of which are being used or charged against the contractor. There's $22,000 of additional funds that'll be covering additional works that have been identified through the course of the project. And there's sufficient budget to cover the costs, and we're recommending that we proceed with the extension.
Thank you very much. Questions, Councillor Rawson, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. Brian, we've done this a few times. I'm comfortable with this. Just what's the extension date go till? Is it next spring?
It's hard to, I didn't specify a date because it's really hard to tie down a particular date. That's why I'm just leaving it as a budgetary extension. Okay. The grit removal system in particular is one that's is up in the air. We're looking at installing a retrofit to the existing grit removal system, and testing is required after that. So the timeline will be largely dependent on the testing that's completed over the next month or so.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote then. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Moving on to 9.6. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Whereas municipalities are responsible, mature order of government in Ontario, and whereas the town of Penetanguishene promotes, supports, and encourages strong and effective rural and northern rural governments, and whereas the town of Penetanguishene supports a responsible and fiscally accountable development of a municipal asset management plan, and whereas the province of Ontario, through the Ministry of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure, has developed a proposed municipal asset management planning regulation, and whereas the proposed municipal asset planning regulation has been posted on the Environmental Registry as 013-0551, and whereas the town of Penetanguishene has reviewed the proposed municipal asset management planning regulation, and whereas the town of Penetanguishene has reviewed the submission on the proposed municipal asset management planning regulations submitted by the Rural Ontario Municipal Association, now therefore be it resolved that the town of Penetanguishene agrees that the proposed municipal asset management planning regulation, 1, is overly prescriptive, 2, does not reflect the principle that municipalities are responsible, mature governments, 3, incrementally increases engineering costs for municipalities at a time when the demand for engineering firms' expertise may exceed the availability, 4, will create a resource and fiscal strain on our municipality and others, more specifically the small rural, northern rural communities that have limited staffing capacity, being the most vulnerable and sensitive to an increasingly burdensome regulatory environment. Further be it resolved that copies of this motion be sent to the Minister of Infrastructure, AMO, and our local MPP, Patrick Brown. Deputy Mayor, please.
I did speak to the treasurer about this earlier today and fully support the position. I don't know, Carrie, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ministry of Infrastructure is seeking comments from the municipalities in Ontario by July 24th regarding the government's proposed new asset management planning regulations. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Rural Ontario Municipal Association have each prepared their commentary, and I forwarded that and attached that to the agenda. As well, Roma provided a sample motion to the 444 municipalities in Ontario and encouraged Council to review the information as well as approve the motion that can be forwarded to the government by the July 24th deadline. Basically, the comments related to the asset management regulations that the government is trying to implement. It's a bit aggressive in terms of the timing in 3 years. It's also creating strains on resources in terms of funding to do this, additional training, additional software, additional labor force to do that, or consultants' fees to do that. So I did go to a Watson and Associates asset management planning workshop in Brampton last week, and the discussions around the table were both for and against both for that the asset management planning does need to be standardized across Ontario, which it isn't right now. Basically, everybody put together their initial asset management plan when the government first came out with the requirement, so that their Ontario Municipal Fund grant would continue to flow as long as each municipality had an asset management plan. But now with the government's prescriptive regulations that are being proposed, the municipal associations just want each municipality to review and support their stance and their response that will be forwarded to the government.
I just have one myself. So I just see that we're going to the Minister of Infrastructure in this, but I think a friendly amendment, if I could, Deputy Mayor, that we also send one to the Minister of Economic Development, because that's where this actually came from as well. So if we could add that as a friendly amendment to your motion. And Municipal Affairs, yeah, we might as well do the two of them.
Very good. Yeah,
it's just
I
friendly.
agree.
Any other comments, questions? Yeah, we can send one to the Premier's office as well. Yep. So we'll add in Ministry of Municipal Affairs, Ministry of Economic Development, and the Premier's office to the motion. Stacey, any other comments, questions before I call for the vote? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Then all in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Okay, moving on to our bylaws, and we do have a consideration of several bylaws, 4 of them in fact. It's moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Saunders, that the Council of the Town of Penetanguishene introduce the following bylaws: 2017-54, 2017-55, 2017-56, 2017-57, and that the bylaws be read a first time, deemed to be read a second time, a third time, and carried. Does any member wish to pull any of these bylaws for discussion? Councillor Saunders.
Your Worship, please refresh my memory. I thought we had not agreed on the lease for the curling club.
Let's pull that one for discussion.
We are going to.
Yeah, it didn't get pulled from committee of the whole, but we can pull it now for discussion.
Sure, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, we'll pull that. Which one is that, Stacey, in terms of numbers?
56.
56, okay, we'll pull 56 for discussion. Okay, Councillor Rawson?
And 54.
Okay, so we'll pull 56 and 54, so we'll call for a vote on 55 and 57. All in favor of those bylaws? and they are carried. And we'll start in order, so we'll go to 54 first. Councillor Rossin, so if you could address your comments, please.
I won't make this long-winded tonight. I just haven't been a huge proponent on the fire service model, meaning when we first talked about this, there was lots of discussion that the town of Penetangishene would be saving upwards of $60,000, $70,000. The CEO spoke out about this when we did this in committee, that we're saving about $9,000. I believe, and it speaks to it in the contract, that we should be negotiating this with the town of Midland during this whole new contract. So I don't think we're getting our value in for our citizens. We've talked about the service and the service delivery and all those pieces. I get that the right person, the right job, but I don't think value for dollars is not there. So I just want to bring that up. I feel we should go back to the table and see about that.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on bylaw number 54 before I call for the motion vote? Seeing none, all in favor of Council Bylaw 54? Opposed? Councillor Rossin was opposed. Okay. Sorry, let's go again then. I'm all in favor of passing bylaw 54? Hands up. So that's 5. Opposed is 4, and that bylaw is carried. Thank you very much. Bylaw number 56, Councillor Saunders, please.
We discussed this earlier in the evening, but I don't recall us making a decision on the issue. And my question is with respect to the alleged comment by the president that unless we agreed with the curling club's position on the word exclusive, that they would not sign the agreement. Now, it seems to me that we ought not to be signing anything that ratifies anything until the director of the curling club accepts the fact that we own the building, and if this is a term we want in the lease, then we won't sign it unless the lease reads in our direction. And so if he doesn't want to sign it, then that's up to him. At that point, there is no agreement between them and ourselves.
Thanks. Sherry, did you want to provide some background for that? Maybe Councillor LaRue was at the meeting as well, perhaps?
Okay, thank you, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Saunders. The agreement that was approved by Committee of the Whole at the last meeting was the one that was presented by staff, and it had the word exclusive use for the curling season, the winter period. That was approved by Committee of the Whole to be brought forward to Council. However, there was a comment made by Councillor Lauder to see if a consideration could be made for the changing of the word exclusive from exclusive to primary. So in follow-up to that, I did have some conversation with the curling club, as did, I believe, Councillor LaRue at the meeting. And I provided a follow-up report for your package today. The agreement that is attached in the bylaw is a revised agreement with a slight revisions from the first one. However, the changes do not change the intent of what was presented and approved by Committee of the Whole the first time around, with the exception of the number of members representing the town and the curling club on a joint committee should a conflict arise, and that was presented in the report. So the bylaw and the agreement before you today is essentially the same one that was presented last time, with the exception of a few housekeeping changes at the request of the club, and like I said, does not change the intent as previously brought forward.
Councillor LaRue, did you want to make some background comments? Councillor Saunders, then, sir, please.
Just a follow-up question. I appreciate your comments very much, Sherry, but I'm still left with that issue of the exclusivity, that they seem to feel that they won't sign the agreement unless they have exclusive control during the curling season, and I certainly am not prepared to consent to that as one councillor, and so I don't know where that leaves us, and perhaps Councillor LaRue could shed some light on that.
Do you want to provide background, and then I'll go to the CEO who has a thought.
I do, Your Worship. In essence, the last meeting of Committee of the Whole, it was passed that the agreement that was going to go forward, and there was a change made in the portion that dealt with the curling club in the off-season, that the word exclusive be changed to primary, which was done. And from my understanding at our last board meeting at the curling club that and that was not going to be an issue. There were a few little minor adjustments and changes that meant really no big deal to the agreement. And I'm not aware to the fact that the chair of the board has said, or is going to say that if the word exclusive is not there, that they're not prepared to move forward with the agreement. From my understanding now, the agreement that's been brought forward, that's just part of this bylaw, that they're prepared to move on it, and they've agreed that that ownership is the town's ownership now. We got past that stage, that the building and the property are both in the ownership of the municipality, and I don't see any reason why we can't move forward with this agreement and put this thing to bed after a long one-year battle to even determine ownership of the building.
CEO, please.
I think a lot of what I was going to say, the chair of RCS just spoke to. Thank you.
So I guess, Sherry, just in terms of primary versus exclusive, you've been pretty close to this, and you're going to have to own this contract as the director representing the town. You see that as an obstacle, like a problem for you, primary versus exclusive? I do take Councillor Saunders' point, but at the end of the day, if it, and just asking for your, as the director, if you see that as an issue of concern for you and your team.
Thank you for your question, Your Worship. My original recommendation was to go with the word exclusive use for the club. I did recommend to council that we change to a non-exclusive period for the summer, as did our solicitor, as we can't anticipate at this point in time for the next 10 years what programming at the amphitheater, the market, moving into the park, what that will bring. Hence the request to make the change. With respect to the winter season, the building is built to be a curling club. The club has always accommodated our requests, and we do not anticipate the need to use it any more than we have. So that's why we brought forward our recommendation to stay with exclusive use. The agreement also contains a clause, an exit clause, that we can terminate within 90 days. Without cause, as long as we let them see a curling season through. So we do have that capacity should something go sideways.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Lauder, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And basically, once again, I totally agree. I'm a little disappointed with the word exclusive. The other option that I mentioned, Sherry, you've mentioned several times that the club in the past years has always been accommodating with respect to special events that we have had. But I do remember my 2.5 years here in council, there's been situations where the club hasn't been originally accommodating, and we've had to fight for it in order to get some accommodations. So that's what's brought up these discussions to begin with. Why I'm willing to accept this now is based on Sherry's last comment, the fact that we do have termination clauses, and they are effective, and we can terminate within any period of time, with a specified period of time. That being said, I'm disappointed the council has had hardships and has brought about these conversations, and now is entering into a new lease agreement, which really is no change other than the summer. So with the termination, I'm just challenging council to the fact that if we are disappointed in the future, or as councils in the future are disappointed with the use that's being given to the town of their own property, then we should look at it and once again take definitive action against the club. Thank you.
Councillor, Doug, have you spoken yet? No, Councillor Ross, then I'll go to Councillor Leroux, because you've already spoken.
I wasn't going to speak, but I'm going to. I think it's bad if we're going into this with a premise of wanting to terminate 90 days, whatever, in the next duration of the term. So either we're in or we're not. The curling club does a great job. I'm sure I think you did a good job in this, so thanks. The curling club does a great job in the town, and they rely on the rentals of the club to keep this club sustainable. So we're talking about non-exclusive, exclusive. They need the club for generating revenue. If not, then we're going to have to look at other things to help support it. People in the community like the curling club. They use the curling club. At the end of the day, they're able to maintain. They've invested lots of infrastructure and money to keep that club going. So this is good for us. It's good for them. And looking at 90-day exclusion clause because we don't like the terms, we want to renegotiate, that's nonsense. There's been a lot of time and effort put into this. I think this is good work, and it's a good compromise on all parties.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor LaRue, beg your pardon. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I have to add the fact that we go back to 1972 when this curling club was built. It was built by the people of the curling club. The majority of the cost was paid by them. The addition that was put on it a number of years ago was paid for by them. And yet we still own the building. And to say that there's been major issues, this is our fourth 10-year agreement. The first 30 years have had very little disagreement, and it has operated and is a curling club. They do not receive an operating or capital budget from the municipality, as does our museum and our library and so forth. And as Councillor Rawson has pointed out, it's a sustainability is being able to have that lounge in the summer months to procure funding to offset their winter expenses. So I think that the agreement that we have gives the town much control, and I think it's time to move on.
Thank you for that. Any other final comments for call for the vote? Councillor Levy.
I just briefly want to say thank you very much to Sherry and to Councillor LaRue for their hard work. Thank you very much, Doug. You guys both finalized it and brought it home.
All right. Final comments. So I'll call for the. I need a mover and seconder for 56. Councillor Ross and Councillor Saunders. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Good stuff. Good conversation. Where am I now? We're on to question periods from the medium public. Stacy, I know I'll get us in camera before the bylaw. Question period from the medium public? No? Elizabeth? Okay, you're good? All right. Council, any announcements or inquiries? Lots going on in the town. We got the Cupcake Festival this weekend. We got All Things Canadian and the Urban Slide next week. And I should say, by the way, for folks listening and watching live streaming, and for the press as well, if you could, the Urban Slide, of course, has been canceled in many municipalities. The last Urban Slide event of this season is in Penetangmachine. So you'll see some, it's not happening in Huntsville and I think Wyerton and a few other spots. So the marketplace might get confused, but the Penetangmachine event is a go and is happening. Councillor Rawson.
Thanks, Your Worship. The town is going through a service review process, and we really want some public involvement on the public consultation. And I hope the CEO can speak to that, just so we get a lot of public involvement on the service review. We'd love to get feedback from people on that.
Thank you very much. I think that's July 27th at 5 o'clock here in our chambers. But CEO, please.
Yeah, through Your Worship, the consultants have gone through a number of processes to get us where we are today. And ultimately, our next steering committee meeting will be with just the staff and the 3 members of council will be in the morning on the 27th, but we certainly are looking for as many members of the public, citizens, business owners, etc., to join us on Thursday, July 27th, so next Thursday at 5 o'clock here in council chambers to hear a presentation from the consultant and provide any feedback. We've marketed and advertised that, and we'll continue to do so, and hopefully we get a good turnout.
Thank you very much. Alrighty, so there are no more announcements or inquiries. I need a mover and seconder to reconvene our in-camera session. Moved by Councillor Rawson, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Okay, we'll reconvene our closed session. Thanks, everybody. Good night, everybody. remember Fred telling me that, Fred after telling me that. No, but Fred was saying this so often. We're so big. Somebody's done something. That was the challenge. Don't plug too quick, because you missed all the good stuff, Elizabeth. We're really feisty now. You could have had the Rogers exclusive. LaRue, let's go. Yes. Let's go, LaRue. All righty, thank you. So we had a motion to rise from in camera, and all in favor of that. We are up for air. Moving on to our next item in front of us is the confirmation bylaw. And it's moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Saunders, that the confirmation bylaw 2017-58 be signed, sealed by the Mayor and the Clerk. All in favor of that motion? That is carried. And Stacy, we are adjourned, I think it's at 9:44 p.m. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody. It's one of my favorite ones. It's the new series season started tonight at 9. She sent me an email and said, "No, I'm not going to make shoes." Oh well, I emailed her back. That wasn't a very sincere. Oh well.